active at different times, and so you see neurons are totally differently active everywhere. But your entire brain is active all the time. Okay? And what you're doing is, what your brain is doing is, it uses rhythms to synchronize the different areas that belong together. So the visual, the smell, the sound, everything that belongs together gets suddenly synchronized during this rhythm, whereas the other things that don't belong together, they continue to be totally desynchronized. And so that's kind of the idea why rhythms are very important. And then, given that you have so many rhythms going on, breathing could be an important part to try to collect all these rhythms together and give them another timing mechanism. And so maybe that's why you get you can collect your thoughts. I have to tell you, of course, we don't know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's ideas. Okay, this is speculation. That's a hypothesis. But that could explain why breathing is such an important timing mechanism. But this would be, for example, research that would be fascinating for someone like you later on to dissect, the same way how we dissected the breathing rhythm, to dissect how the brain generates these rhythms. And the idea that I gave you, that basically you have to create simultaneously, is really an overarching idea, but how this exactly works is still not known. And there's another important fact of what I just told you. When you're sleeping, it doesn't matter any more time, because now you're sleeping and the reality is not existing. The reality tells you have to bring everything together, but in sleep it doesn't matter. So now you can basically get rid of the timing, and now you can transform all your memories to the cortex independent of the time. That's why when you sleep, time can be way faster. So something that maybe took 2 hours during the day may take only 2 seconds at night, because you can process information differently in different times. So that's why really time is something relative. Time is something that your brain generates. And I don't know whether you experience it. Sometimes, you're in a very dangerous situation, and then something goes very slow. You suddenly really can see, oh my God, I'm falling, and then you can react or not, because your brain is generating the time. It's nothing, I would say it's real, but it's generated in the brain. Okay? Now, also what is important is what I just told you, that when you have a sensory input coming in, it really doesn't generate new activity. It just changes the timing of the activity. So your brain is constantly active, and then when sensory input comes, they just shift the time. So basically that's why your brain is always active. It's not that when you close your eyes, the visual cortex shuts out. No, it's always active. But when you turn on your eyes, your open eyes, then it determines when the activity is activated. Now, this synchronization between these different areas depends on this default network state, which is a framework. And in some disorders, like for example, this is a patient with cerebral palsy, these connections were not formed right in the development. So this connectivity, the functional connectivity here, is weaker than this functional connectivity. And so these patients have a problem, to synchronize left and right, so that's why they have problems walking, etc. And so basically this framework that is given by your brain through the connectivity, it determines also how you process left and right information. And these are different patients with cerebral palsy, and you can see they are asymmetrical, or some are very connected, and this patient does very well, can walk. This patient has a hard time because this framework of these connections are basically disturbed. And one of the goals of medicine is also to, once you understand this, how can we make this patient into this patient? How can we start to train these connections in order to change the course of this disease? So understanding the brain is really important for you later on in medical education. And this is another example. This is a patient with Fragile X, which is some sort of a form of autism. And you can see you give them an auditory stimulus and a visual stimulus. And you can see the visual stimulus is pretty similar here in black versus the control, and it's tripled. versus the auditory stimulus is much different than the one of the control. So basically, a lot of the diseases, psychiatric diseases and neurological diseases, are due to problems with this timing of information going into the brain, and therefore they have problems with processing social information, auditory information, visual information. This is an example of a child with autism, and this is work done by Joan Welch, who is also in Seattle, in my center. And you can see that basically, in fact, these autistic kids, they process information much faster than a control. So they're way more sensitive to this input from the world outside. And that's why it's also overwhelming for them in order to process this. Okay, so I really spent now some time to tell you about the brain's most important role, which is really generating time. Because if you don't generate time properly, then you have problems with social communications, for example. Because if you look at a person and you get all this information of the face, of the looks, of the breathing of that person, and you process this all so fast and say, oh my God, I better look at the chair which doesn't move. Okay? So that's why autism can be explained by this timing. And there are many, many diseases you can explain with this problem. So I don't know how much we're doing, but I want to give you a few more minutes on the next important characteristic of the brain. So do we have time, or should I go on? Okay, I'll go a little bit on, okay? So, yeah. So basically, what differentiates the brain from any other organ in your body? Okay? For example, the skin. And what differentiates the brain is that in the brain, it really depends on what an individual nerve cell is doing, where this nerve cell is located, and how it is connected. Okay? And what do I mean with this? Like, when you look at the skin, your skin is basically composed of, let's say, 6 different types of cells. You know, for example, you have the keratinocytes, etc. But you can take a piece of your skin and put it somewhere else, and the skin will regrow again, because it really doesn't matter for these keratinocytes where they're sitting. They will have still the same function as they have there. The same thing for a liver cell. You know, like a liver cell is important for you know, having all these enzymes to get rid of the toxins, etc. But really, every liver cell has a similar kind of role, you know? When you go into the brain, it's a very different ballgame. Because every cell, for example, these are hippocampal cells, every cell has something else to do with memory, okay? If you think about your motor cortex, every cell has a different role in controlling your behavior. So if I want to lift my arm or my finger, or if I want to move my tongue, I have to activate very, very specific neurons in order to make this movement. And I have not only to activate the neurons very specifically, but also the timing has to be totally perfect. So it's an enormous task to just like make one step or to say a word. It's enormous timing, and because you have to combine many specific neurons. And that's why if I drink a little bit of alcohol, you hear it, you know, because my timing is not right anymore. And the police will definitely hear it. And then also, if what you also notice, I have an accent. You know, like your accent means also your timing is not exactly like anybody else's. So this is basically why the brain is different, because it matters what every individual neuron is doing, where exactly it's located, and how it's connected. Okay? And of course, this is very relevant for neurosurgery. So when the neurosurgeon takes out this piece of tissue that causes the focus, the neurosurgeon has to know exactly what this area is doing. Because if the person takes this out because of epilepsy, and then this person cannot talk anymore afterwards, then the patient will be totally desperate. So they need to know exactly what this area is doing. But what you often find is that when the neurosurgeons take this area out, For example, it is involved in learning and memory, the hippocampus, which is actually very important in adults. Adults have often temporal lobe epilepsies. Then in some cases where normally learning is done, because of the epileptic focus, actually you take it out and your learning is better, because other areas have taken over. So the brain is very plastic. And in fact, this is a study where they looked at 150 children, where they took out half of the brain in order to do epileptic surgery. And you would think these children can never walk again, but in fact, they can walk independently 83%. So the brain of a child is extremely plastic. If you would do this in myself, in me, take half of my brain away, I would never be able to walk again. So these children can do this. They have often, 35% have only mild impairment. That's why basically if this whole hemisphere is full of seizures, the neurosurgeon will decide to take it out, even though they know you need half of the brain. But in children, it can be fixed. So the brain of a child is very plastic and able to learn a lot, but these children don't have unlimited learning potential. Okay, so it doesn't mean a child can learn anything. It really depends on exactly when a child learns something, and it depends on the trajectory, how the brain develops. And the brain develops over 21 years. You know what, we have to finish at 10, and it's like 4 minutes before 10. Okay, so basically let me wrap up, and there are basically important time windows when you learn something. You can not teach a 1-year-old to speak because the different speech areas are not fully developed yet. You cannot expect from a teenager, you're now all adults of course, 18 and older, but from a 16-year-old, you know, their prefrontal cortex is not really connected to the rest of the brain to the same extent as it is in someone like me. And so the brain develops over 21 years because it's a huge problem. You know, there are like billions of nerve cells where every neuron has to be connected exactly right. And you have only 30,000 genes. So basically the genes cannot tell you how these neurons are connected. So you have an interaction with the environment, so the more you learn, the better you can make these connections that are important for learning and memory. So basically, throughout the 21 years, your brain gets connected, and as I told you, these connections are important later on to have the right timing that you need for generating this rhythmic activity in your brain and be functional. Okay, so maybe I stop here, but I hope I inspired you to think about science when you become a clinician, because eventually, you know, you have to understand why a person is sick. And in many cases, it's sick because of neurological problems. And at the moment, neurological problems are very difficult to solve because, as you saw, the brain is very difficult to understand. But these fundamental insights can help you to form a conceptual framework. For example, why someone is autistic or why someone cannot walk, etc. So, thank you for your attention.
Yes. Now it's your turn. You can ask your doubts.
You're allowed to ask questions.
Yes.
Yes.
You're talking about circadian rhythms.
Yes.
And how they're one of the most fundamental aspects which in every cell of the body.
Yeah.
So, a couple of days back I was reading about this article in which it said that Nikola Tesla and Edison,
Yeah.
they had altered this to such an extent that they hardly slept for more than 4 hours per day. And that they follow this practice for the most part of their lives.
Yeah.
You can't even say that they didn't lead productive lives.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
how does that work?
You know, it's a very important question. So probably what happened is they didn't sleep later on. You know, like I think there are different ages. You know, at your age, the brain is still developing, and at that time, you know, sleeping well is very important. And at my age, you know, that for example, the deep sleep gets so smaller and smaller, and maybe that explains it. But also maybe they're more efficient. I don't know. It's something I really don't talk about is individual variability. You know, like every patient, every person, because you set up your brain differently. every one of us took 21 years to develop the brain, and there's huge differences how every brain works. And so maybe these geniuses made it so they can consolidate very quickly, even in 4 hours sleep. Whereas, for example, if I don't sleep my 6 hours at least, I don't function. So every person is different. And in fact, I had a slide in there, but I didn't show you. You know, the brain becomes first thicker during development, and then thinner. And the reason it becomes thinner is because not you start to degenerate already with 4 years, but you start to specialize. You take away things that you don't need and focus on the things that you need. And so there's a huge difference between some intelligent people and not so intelligent people in how their trajectory of development is. And so maybe some Tesla and Edison, they became extremely efficient in their creativity and were able to do this in 4 hours. But I don't think everybody can do this, you know, so that's my answer, okay? Individual variation. That's why it's very important that you learn right now, because this is your powerful time to shape your brain. Because the genes cannot do this. It's you with your environment, with your teachers, etc., to learn and connect your brain and make it very efficient for the rest of your life. So maybe in 20 years you are okay with 4 years sleep. Yeah.
I would like to add one more person along with this too. Currently also our Prime Minister, he sleeps for 4 hours only. And his efficiency and work is very much good, better than who sleeps more than 8 hours.
But my important thing is though, don't assume because some geniuses can do it 4 hours that everybody should do this. I tell you specifically as students, you often think, I don't need sleep, I need to work, I work too hard. You need sleep, okay? And don't mess it up. Don't mess it up because it's a rhythm. And so I've seen kids that work 24 hours. And in fact, I was teaching every year medical students and I told them, yes, it's important to work hard, but it's also important to go back and sleep to digest what we tell you. And I think what's important also for you will be in these lectures, come to these lectures to learn concepts, concepts. Because all the details of exactly how this equation works is not so important because nowadays you have Google, so a lot of the details you can Google immediately, but the concepts are what you have to learn, okay? So, and for that you need sleep overnight because you have to get inspired thinking about it and putting things into concept, So I think important is not only the details, but also the big picture. And for that, I think you need to sleep, okay? What about the time of sleep? It's regular. It's about the regularity. Oh yes, that's a very can diseases be cured by synchronizing body clocks. And the best example right now is Parkinson's disease. You know that what people do is deep brain stimulation, and it brings rhythmic stimulation to your subthalamic nucleus, and that helps people to synchronize their activity so they don't have all the tremors. And I have seen movies that are totally amazing. So one of the problems with Parkinson's patients is they have something called akinesia. So they can, for example, not go over this line. They stop. And basically the initiation of a movement is very, very difficult. And then when they move very slowly. And I've seen movies where the patient comes into the room and can hardly move, and then someone plays music with a beat, bum, 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 and suddenly this person could walk. So basically this rhythmic activity helped very much. People are thinking about biofeedback for migraines and for headaches, because really a lot of this is disturbed rhythms in your brain, and it helps. And I think for some people music is very, very important, and they can do this. But we ask, for example, a lot of our neurosurgeons, how important is it music during operation? Some people say, I can only operate if I have good music there. We have Jason who needs heavy metal music during operation because it helps him to focus. It drives me crazy, but he likes it. Other people, neurosurgeons say, no, if I hear music during operation, I cannot focus. So people use different rhythms and individually what they need, etc. And so, again, individuality is there, but the question is very good. It's, yes, rhythms can cure rhythms. And in fact, we are very much thinking about, like, for example, someone who is manic depressant, they have different rhythms. And how can we capture this is a big deal. And compulsive disorders like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders, where people have to wash their hands all the time, even though they're clean, can be treated with deep brain stimulation by changing the rhythms. The only problem right now is that this is a huge operation. You put in a big electrode into this. So right now we do this on Parkinson patients, but otherwise they would die. But you wouldn't do this for someone, like who has just problems with the hand washing. So we're hoping 10 years down the road, when you guys are at your peak of your careers, that you can use optogenetic viruses and then make much more specific stimulations. And that could help, to regulate rhythms and cure a lot of neurological disorders. So right now, all I can give you is concept, and we have tools, as I showed you, where it's important when you activate these two neurons. Because if you activate them in the wrong time, you will mess it up. And it will be up to you to bring this to the patient. And I think that's why, in fact, you are in the most exciting time to become medical students. Because all this technology is all there to help animals right now. But we have not gone to the human yet. Because in the human it's a different beast, but you can solve this. And I bet you in 20 years, medicine will look very different. So watch out for science, be on top of science, because if you're not on top of this, in 20 years, you have to think like a geneticist, because otherwise you cannot translate all the new knowledge into the patient. So watch out for science, get inspired, think about this conceptually, understand that we don't understand everything yet, but you have to put this into the context, and as science develops, you have to say, oh wow, now we can do this. I didn't know this before. And I tell you, a lot of the things I told you today, we couldn't do 4 years ago, and I wouldn't have dreamed to stimulate neurons exactly during the same time, when we did it now. So things are moving very, very fast. So be on top of it and learn about it and be excited about it. Okay?
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
I just like to tell you that just now you have listened to one of the greatest pediatric neurosurgeons in the earth, Professor Nino Ramirez. If you want to know about him, just Google it, Professor Ramirez. You will find out where he stands. Not only as a professor, but also as a scientist and neurosurgeon, and that also a very delicate area of the pediatric neurosurgery. He is one of the top in the world. So it is a fortunate moment for each of you. I don't think that other medical school people have an opportunity to first year students to expose to one of the greatest pediatric neurosurgeon in the world. So please remember that. And also follow one thing that he has suggested, that it is the science which fits the originality with discovery or invention that is required more than the disposition as a surgeon or physician. He, being a pediatric neurosurgeon, he suggested to go for the basic science. And that is, you must remember, without science, you don't stand anywhere. Please remember that and follow me. Thank you, Nino, for accepting our invitation to come here all the way. Thank you, Erika. Dr. Erika, she is also a professor of biology. She was, now she has left. Just see, she was the greatest lady You cannot imagine how amazing life of Dr. Erika. And it's an amazing personality she is having. And she runs the charity, she runs the orchid gardens, she has writing the books. Many things she does apart from supporting me. You must appreciate. Thank you, Erika, for coming here, along with Nino, giving us support. We wish you should come again.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Thank you, everybody, the faculty, the students, for coming and taking your time. And I wish you good luck for your exams. Okay?
Yes,
I know your rhythms are going crazy right now, so keep it up. Okay? Thanks.
Thanks.